R80.
as well. So.
All right.
Okay, yeah. So if you could start off by telling us how you got involved with the project, Guy first.
Yeah, Apple contacted us. Getting on for 2 years ago, and sort of instructed us what they wanted, which was a stripped down version of the Let It Be as everyone knows it. So we trawled through 30 tapes, wasn't it? 30 tapes?
Trawled through 30 tapes.
Which was how many hours? A lot of hours of tapes. And we basically looked to see if there were any better versions or better edits that we could do, and it started from there really, and that's where we started researching.
Did you feel any pressure at all, to work on such an immense project like this?
Not really. I mean, the thing is that the team of us, Guy and I and Alan Rouse, who sort of were all involved in it from the start, we all kind of together and independently have been involved for quite a long time with Beatles projects. Like working backwards, we've all worked on the recent anthology release, the DVD release for that. We've been involved in Lennon projects, and I mean I was involved in the original audio Beatles anthologies as well. So I mean it wasn't like sort of Beatles stuff was new to us, cause we'd all sort of done quite a bit of work.
We weren't Beatles virgins, as they were.
Yeah, but obviously they're one of the most popular bands in the world as we know it, and there's a lot of people that are sort of going to give you a lot of stick if you don't do it as they like. Did you not feel that sort of pressure at all?
Well, I think the thing with that is that really, I mean, there are so many different thoughts, especially like due to the nature of this particular project as well. I mean, our main focus was just to make a really good sounding album. I think we didn't really. For me certainly personally, there weren't really that many thoughts of, or like. I mean, we just had to. Our brief was just to research the takes, just basically get the best sort of raw rock and roll kind of album.
At the end of the day, you can't sort of please all the people all the time. And we were happy with it, and they were happy with it, so we're happy.
Did Paul McCartney or Ringo or George, when he was still alive, have any input at all?
Well, it was more like from the beginning. It was more sort of. I mean, it was Apple, really, like from the beginning, and they again. But I think through association, they let us get on with it. And then, I mean, towards near as the mixing sessions progressed. We then had them coming in and having a listen and stuff. So, which was great.
Only a couple of times really, and for the final playback, they seemed pretty happy. So.
Yeah. What was Paul's opinion on it?
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, he
very
really
positive. Very positive.
Yeah, did he give you any sort of guidelines as to what?
He was just really happy with it. I mean, one of the things, the first thing we played was the new version of Long and Winding Road. So, obviously, I think that's a big one for him.
Yeah.
So he was just smiling and just was. So we were at the back of the room, and he just sort of turned around and was very pleased, really, wasn't he, with it?
Nervously standing at the back of the room.
What would you say? How would you describe the difference, say, with Long and Winding Road? What would you say the differences are between the two versions? How would you describe that difference?
Well, I mean, certainly for that track, the main difference is no overdubs. It's basically we've turned it into more of an intimate track, I'd say. I mean, and also, I mean, that's actually one of the songs that it is actually a different version. Quite a lot of the time, the basis of the tracks are versions that people already know. But Long and Winding is a particular one that's just probably one of the most different. That and Across the Universe are very different versions, but mostly it's sort of kept to the same thing. But they're pretty different.
Cool. Could I get you both now to actually play the two different versions?
Sure, absolutely.
So this is Long and Winding Road.
This is Long and Winding Road.
You'll hear the old version first.
The long and winding road that leads to your door will never disappear.
So obviously
I've seen that road before.
So back to the old one.
Lead me to your door. The wild and
Okay then.
What was the logistics of like taking off the big violins and the bigger sound that Phil Spector had put on there? Did you come up against any problems at all?
Not really, because I mean, Phil had. I mean, he'd used one of the takes as a basis, so sort of in those situations, we just went back to the.
Went back a step before he.
Yeah, basically the
got
step
tapes,
before.
essentially.
Right.
So he made a copy of the tape and then put his overdubs onto a fresh tape, essentially.
Yeah, I read somewhere that the actual original material was actually quite rough. That that the Beatles had actually given Phil in the first place. Did you find that at all when you were working on it?
Well, not. I mean, but in a way, that's the reason why we went through and investigated. Because, I mean, that's another reason with Long and Winding, because like when the orchestra was taken off of it. Just it was a unanimous decision that like the performance which we've used, which was actually on the 31st of January after they'd done the rooftop show, like one of the final things they did, that basically they'd just worked on it a little bit more, and it was just like the performance was stronger. But I mean, one of the things that we were really happy about, was when we were going through the tapes, and you could hear all these bits that we hadn't really sort of picked up before. I mean, the playing was really good. I mean, the playing was fantastic on a lot of the stuff. So, you know, that's one of the things we've aimed to get out of it as well, just to hear a lot of the elements that haven't really been heard before.
And how would you describe the final album, the sort of the sound that it has to it?
I think it's a lot more cohesive as an album now, and we changed the running order, took away some of the chat and the things that we sort of considered to be a little bit superfluous. So and we tried to as much as we could make it sound like a modern day album as far as we could, because it was recorded 33 years ago. So we were slightly limited by those factors, but I think essentially we
kind of tried to sort of bridge a gap.
Yeah.
So we didn't want it to sound sort of we wanted to keep it with its roots, obviously, but just sort of we want you to be able to sort of put this in your player and then put something else in your player, and you know, it not be like. We just want it to sound a bit
stand
now.
up, yeah, to the stuff, hopefully.
And the album at its time when it came out, how important was it as an album, Let It Be, and what does it actually mean in the big scheme of the Beatles, do you think?
I wasn't
In
born,
your-
I don't know.
but in your opinion, I mean, were you Beatles fans before you got involved with this project?
Yeah, because of reasons we discussed earlier.
Mm.
You know, we have been involved in a few projects,
Yeah.
and I'm from Merseyside, so I sort of grew up with the Beatles, really. Well, I mean, I didn't discover them until I was sort of 14, but yeah, I've been a big fan for a long time. But as regards to Let It Be, I mean, I suppose it was a document of them, or the film especially was a document of them, you know, sort of imploding or whatever. But I mean, I don't think the music suggests that at all. I think it's really strong and vibey. You know, it's good fun.
Yeah, exactly.
So you think the fans are going to like this album, your version?
Hope so.
Yeah. I mean, it's there for them to listen to and enjoy, really. So it's you know, everyone involved has been really happy with it. So yeah.
When you've got songs like Let It Be and these real sort of massive songs that have been in our conscious for so long, did you find it difficult to actually do something different? You know, because as I say, it's always lodged in your mind. Let It Be must sound like this, or you know, Winding Road must sound like that, and to actually then go in and change something that it's always been.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it was we couldn't be too conscious of that when we were doing it, because you know, we were given, you know, something to do, and we had to do it to the best of our abilities, really. So, I mean, removing stuff obviously is gonna. It's a different, you know, you're going to get different versions, and because we did some editing as well, they're different than the versions that people know anyway. So from that point of view, no, not really.
I mean, really, apart from the overdubs, it wasn't one of their albums anyway to begin with that had lots of overdubs anyway. So really, I mean, what we were working with wasn't that different
Yeah.
to the original stuff. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't like it wasn't like vastly. There weren't vast changes in the tracks and stuff like that. So no. I just ran out of things to say.
It wasn't
Sorry.
just housing it up or anything anyway.
Well,
was it?
no, not at all. I mean, stripping it back, obviously
Yeah,
we were doing so. It was quite difficult, really. That.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I think we have to leave it there. That's
Oh.
pretty good.
Before you go, guys, I want to get one more. And remember, don't forget, both of you turned inwards, yeah?
Yeah.
Separate and turn inwards, gentlemen.
Sorry.
And go for it. And didn't you do something? Sorry, didn't you do
Well,
something? And go for it. Someone hit a fader. Lovely.
How you got involved with the project?
I, first of all, was given the task of doing a radio documentary about the whole Let It Be story, because it's a very complicated story of why they recorded the tracks when they did and why they were delayed. And it kind of grew from there. I was asked to sift through hours and hours and hours of material that the Beatles recorded in Twickenham and then in their own studio in London, and found some very interesting material, bursts of songs and conversation. And then it was decided, well, why don't we do a bonus disc to the album called Fly on the Wall, where you just hear little snippets of Beatles conversation and songs that they were doing which never made it onto the record. So that was really interesting, and there's some fantastic gems on that. One of my favourites is a Lennon-McCartney song that they'd written in the late 50s but never recorded until they just burst into this song during the sessions. It's called Because I Know You Love Me So, and it's a really charming early Lennon and McCartney song. And you can hear that on the bonus disc.
Why do you think Let It Be is such an important album to the Beatles and to the history of the Beatles?
The Let It Be album is one of the most complicated Beatles albums because it is unusual in the fact that they recorded it in January 1969, but then it didn't come out for another 14 months. And between recording it and the album coming out, lots of different things happened to them as a group. For example, they went off and recorded another great album, Abbey Road. But when it did come out, it had changed very much from the original concept, which was, let's do this album just as the group. No orchestration, no overdubbing, just us playing live in the studio. And then by the time it came out in 1970, the whole concept had been changed around when they brought in another producer, Phil Spector, to kind of finish the record off. So that's why they now have decided to go back to the tapes and restore the album back to its original concept of the group just playing live in the studio with nothing added.
Why was there a 14-month gap between recording and release?
The album was delayed because the Beatles were filmed all the time that they were doing the Let It Be album. And originally they were going to do a TV film and a TV documentary, but things changed and it became a movie for the cinema. And movies take a long time to cut and finish off. And so the film wasn't coming out until May 1970. So by that time, they had to keep all the recordings on the shelf until the film came out. So it's very unusual. There isn't another example of the Beatles keeping stuff in the can that long.
Were they not actually happy with the album once, Phil Spector had his wicked way with it, I should say, because I love it, but, once he'd had his way with it?
I think it's safe to say that Paul McCartney was not very pleased with the way certain tracks turned out on Let It Be. The ones where Phil Spector really decided to go to town with a lavish orchestra and a celestial choir. The Long and Winding Road particularly is the one that's so different to the original concept of let's just play it live together. And so on Let It Be Naked you hear Paul McCartney singing The Long and Winding Road at the piano, and hardly any other instrumentation from the Beatles, just very simple bass part and drum part and guitar part. And also, it's actually a completely different take to the one that's on the original Let It Be album. The one that you hear on Let It Be Naked is the one you see in the Let It Be film, and it's a vastly superior take. So this is the proper take of The Long and Winding Road, so finally we've got this on a record. So it's wonderful to hear that, and it's so different to the Spector version. It's not like you're disposing of the Spectre version, that's there if you want it, but this is really how they intended that song to be. Very simple, beautiful, touching, ever so sensitive, and just Paul McCartney singing to you in your living room without a huge orchestra backing him up. So it's great to have.
And has Paul been involved at all with the production of the most recent version?
Paul and Ringo have certainly approved the new mixes of the Let It Be album and are delighted with it. I think the thing that Paul McCartney likes about it as well is it's not that it's just restoring the album to the original concept of, hey, no overdubs, just us playing live. But the use today of modern digital technology has meant that it sounds really clear, and it's not like they've added anything to it in a digital way, but it's just made everything crisp and clear, because you can get rid of hiss and crackle and all the things that would have been around in a recording studio in 1969.
So, I mean, what's with the new technology? Was it you're not tempted to actually add a few little bits that can only be done today, or?
Yeah, I was not involved in the digital remix of the album, so it's the guys who were around earlier that you need to talk to about that. I mean, I was involved in the Fly on the Wall disc. If you want to talk to me about what they were doing during the sessions, then I can answer those questions. But I can't talk about the mix. It's not. I wasn't involved.
Fair enough. Okay. Are you happy with the final result?
Well, hang on a minute. What do you mean by the final result? The album or the Fly on the Wall? Because my main involvement is putting together this bonus disc, and I think it would be worth talking about that. Shall I talk about that?
No, if you start off with
All right.
an overall picture.
And then I'll give you an overall thing. Not only do we get Let It Be Naked, which is restoring these tracks back to the original idea of the group playing live in the studio, no overdubs, but I was given the amazing task of sifting through all the audio tapes that were running during the sessions for Let It Be, because they were being filmed for a movie, but the audio tapes were running much longer than the cameras were on. And so I could hear every single take of every song they did during that time, and also conversations between them about the state of the group at the time. So I've put together what's called a Fly on the Wall montage as a bonus disc to this album. And on that you can hear amazing things like they do Because I Know You Love Me So, a previously unreleased Lennon-McCartney song, now released for the very first time. So people can now hear a new, as it were, Beatles song played by the Beatles. I think that's fantastic, and that's on the Fly on the Wall. And also the Beatles doing things like All Things Must Pass, which they never did together, but became the title track of George Harrison's solo album. And also conversations about really their future, because they were going through a pretty emotional time when these recordings were made. And you can hear quite candid conversations about what are we going to do about the group, are we going to carry on? And so the fact that they've allowed this material to be out there is very interesting. So you can actually hear all sorts of things on this bonus disc. I mean, very funny things, like when they were trying to decide where to do the concert, because this was supposed to be a televised concert. They have all sorts of wild schemes about getting on ocean liners and going off to the Arabian desert and playing just as the sun came up. And of course, in the end, they decided, let's just go on the roof of the Apple building. So it's fascinating to hear that stuff. And for the very first time, you can hear it. And it's on this bonus disc with Let It Be Naked. So you get the version of the album, which really is much truer to the original idea for Let It Be, and you get all this extra material too. So it's a wonderful historical package, I think.
You say it gave insight into what was actually going on at the time with the Beatles. Can you give us an overall of what you think was going on at the time?
Yeah. Well, the Let It Be sessions have always been thought of by the Beatles too as an unhappy time. I was able to listen to all the tapes of what was going on during the sessions, and what was interesting for me is that it wasn't a miserable experience, as they've always remembered it as. I mean, John Lennon famously talked about it being just the lowest point for the Beatles. There were some edgy moments, but especially when they moved location from Twickenham Film Studios to their own studio, they really had a good time. And I've heard conversations on these tapes about, isn't it great that we're doing these tracks with no overdubs, and yeah, I'm feeling really into it, it's great. And so they were enthusiastic. So that's interesting. It's like you're hearing about Beatles history. it's always been accepted that they would be unhappy sessions. But actually, when you go back to the tapes, they were great moments. They did enjoy playing together, and they created great songs. And you know, the tracks on this album are pretty classic Beatles material. You know, an album with The Long and Winding Road, Let It Be, Get Back, Across the Universe. I mean, these are classic Beatles songs. So I think there was an air of unfinished business about the album when it came out in 1970, because it had been overdubbed by Phil Spector, maybe not with the full consent of all the band members. So it's tainted a bit by that for the Beatles. But now you can hear it cleaned up with the right versions of some of the songs and sounding really crisp in the new cleaned up sound. So it's fantastic that it's restored in that way. And of course you've still got the old album, that's not going to disappear, so if people really like to hear the album as it was, you can still get that too.
Do you think the Beatles themselves would probably see it as closure, almost, because it is, you know, the album, how it's meant to be heard, and then there's the, you know, it gives the fans a real insight to what was going on at the time, so it's like the storybook closes almost, if you know.
I think there's an element of finally we've laid that goes to rest. I think they were always uncomfortable about the Let It Be experience. Their memories were tainted by the business dealings that were going on and the unhappiness that was around when the album was released. But by going back to the original tapes, they've probably had some sort of feeling of resolution. It's become a kind of a healing process. Hey, it wasn't as bad as we thought. Actually, when you listen to the band, we're playing really well. And wow, there were no overdubs, and yet we sound really tight and together, you know. So the standard of the group was high. They were playing live together and enjoying it. And going up on the roof and playing live was a fantastic thing. And the 4 tracks on the album recorded on the roof sound really good and lively. So yeah, it's been a kind of a healing process for Paul and Ringo, I think. I think they've realised that that unhappy episode wasn't as unhappy as they thought it was. It's kind of like a holiday. If you have a few rainy days and you think of the holiday as pretty good and you forget the rainy days, they did the opposite. You know, they remembered the rainy days rather than the good sunny days. And now I think they've got a full understanding of those sessions, and yeah, there were good times and the band were playing well, and you can hear the results on the album.
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much.
All right. Okay.
Covers everything.